Hello and welcome once again to Learn the Bible. Let me bring my microphone over here. So we are here today and we are going to be doing post 159. And this post is on Leviticus chapter 20 verses 6 to 9. And the title is Witchcraft and Wizardry. All right, so God has been instructing Israel that they should only be seeking after him and not the pagan gods. They should only be seeking God. He's shown that he is not like all these false gods that require their own children as sacrifices, that require them to do all sorts of evil things. But instead, he's shown that he is a God of love and mercy. He would accept the blood of an animal to pay for their sins so that they could be forgiven. Now, of course, we understand in hindsight that what he's actually accepting is the blood of Jesus Christ. These animals were just symbols of Jesus Christ's sacrifice. So in our last post, we saw God, he rejected the child sacrifice of those religions in the area, of those gods in that area. And we know that he's now going to move on. Let's say you didn't worship a god. Well, you also couldn't worship any kind of supernatural force. This supernatural source of power in order to give you strength or prosperity or some kind of benefit outside of God himself. He is the only supernatural power that Israel was to seek. So God specifically speaks about those who would turn to witchcraft, necromancy, or communicating with the dead, and wizardry for their source of blessing. Anyone who's going to look for any source of power outside God, and God is not, they're looking for power, but God's actually offering them the blessing. He's saying, I will give you the blessing. Just live your life in honor of me. But if they didn't want to live in honor of him, but still wanted to receive some kind of help, that's essentially like spitting in God's face. So God says he just like in our past view, whenever somebody were to sacrifice their own child and God would take it very personally, in this same case, God also takes it very personally. He takes a personal stand against those who sought help from these otherworldly beings or witchcraft, okay? And he says they would be cut off from his own people. So he says very clearly, the people of Israel need to be holy because he is the Lord their God who sanctifies them. He is the one who makes them holy. He is the one who purifies them. So they need to behave in a manner that's fitting of that. It really is just fascinating to me how our society, it's become very cavalier, it just brushes off the idea of witchcraft and magic. You know, I've talked to a lot of people, and just like myself, as I mentioned in a few posts ago, I was always taught, well, magic's not real, it's all make-believe. But in today's society, it's not only shown as real, it's shown as harmless. We see in our movies and in our stories and in our theme parks, we see magic as this make-believe power, but it's something that people should desire, something you should look forward to. You know, you ever go to Universal Studios, you're going to see the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and it's amazing, it's beautiful, I've been there. It's really cool. But these whole theme parks and these movies have been devoted to these magical powers and summoning of otherworldly beings, otherworldly things. A generation or two ago, those who used these powers, even in our movies, it was essentially an evil thing. There were witches in that popular Halloween movie. I can't think of the name offhand, but it's where these three witches would try to capture the life of the kids. It's a kids movie. But it was shown that the witches were evil. But today, witchcraft is considered something positive. There's good magic and there's bad magic. So it's done as this favorable thing. I mean, these really popular movies and television shows are all about the issue. When I was a kid, it was the witches were called Bewitched, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the show Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. But historically, witches were evil and genies were evil. Genies actually come from the Arabic folklore, and these were essentially demons that would go around and hurt people and destroy people. But whenever we talk about it today, that picture is never shown. There's no message, there's no disclaimer about the truth of witchcraft, but society totally ignores the matter. Okay, so as Christians, we need to be aware of the real danger of magic. The spirit world is very real. It's very dangerous. As believers, we are the ones who trust in God, and we stay away from the evil things. I mean, face the facts, God is supernatural. He's outside of our natural world, yet he still lives in it, and he actually came into it through Jesus Christ. Now, that means if God is real, which he absolutely is, then angels are real. And that angels are real, there are also fallen angels. And aside from fallen angels, we hear about demons. And we hear about principalities and powers and spiritual beings. There are all sorts of things mentioned in the Bible, and we don't even know if that's a conclusive list. But we know that God is supreme above all these things. So whenever we think about those who seek power from the supernatural world, but it's not from honoring God, that means they must be getting it from somewhere else. And if God forbids the use of these supernatural sources, that means the only ones that would be available for man to tap into are those who disobey God. So all supernatural power that does not stem from God himself comes from fallen angels, from demons, from evil beings. So we have to understand that we need to separate ourselves from such things. Now, does that mean you can't enjoy Harry Potter? Does that mean you can't enjoy your hero movies? Of course that doesn't mean that. If your kids and yourself, if you don't see it yourself, you're also going to hear about it from others. Your kids are going to hear about it. So the idea of witchcraft, it's built into everything. Witchcraft and magic, it's into our superhero movies. It's in Justice League. It's in the Avengers. And you can enjoy these movies. I'm not here to tell you you absolutely can't, because literally, if you were to exclude everything that was disobedient to God, you couldn't step outside your house. But you absolutely need to know the truth. You need to know that the truth is given in context. So think about it as an example where you have a kid watching a movie, and it's just a movie, it's not real, but somebody gets shot or somebody dies. Well, you explain to your child, who doesn't understand any better, that this is acting, that real death is a very serious thing, it's a very big deal, but this is just a movie, it's not real. You're revealing the truth of the matter to the kid. If you see a child in a movie being disrespectful to their parents, you also would say, listen, this is inappropriate, this is acting, but you would explain to them the truth of the matter. I personally believe the same applies when it comes to magic. Magic is the use of the supernatural to gain power and knowledge that you otherwise would not have. The Bible is quite clear that there were demon-possessed people, and I believe there still are demon-possessed people. But they certainly were there during the time of Jesus and the apostles, and they often possessed knowledge that the rest of society didn't have. There were people that knew Jesus was the Christ before he had revealed himself as the Christ to the rest of the world, and those people were all demon-possessed, and Jesus commanded them not to tell it to anyone. There was a woman during the time of the apostles, after Jesus' resurrection, who actually could predict things in the future, and she actually made her owners, she was a servant girl, she made her owners a lot of money. And once they cast her out, once they cast the demons out, well, she could no longer predict the future. So these are very real things. There's even a witch in the Old Testament that claims to have the ability of communicating with the dead, and we're going to get to eventually, when we get to the book of Samuel, that she is able to communicate with the prophet Samuel. And again, that's a very special circumstance and a very interesting story. And she does so on behalf of King Saul. But the fact is, these things are very real. Otherwise, God wouldn't give us a law against it. If you've never seen the series on television, or excuse me, on YouTube, you should look up They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. I believe it's a 4-part series. And it is very interesting because it's not making accusations about what people claim, what people have done for their music. It's actually taking their own quotes and what they said they've done for their music. And you'd be surprised how much influence they get from what they call spirit guides. And again, it's just fascinating. Then you hear the lyrics of the songs and what they're teaching our children. And this was back in the maybe early 2000s, late 90s, somewhere in that range. Probably more like early 2000s. But you should look into it. It's a pretty eye-opening documentary. Um, the truth, okay? The Bible is very clear. Whenever it talks about the armor of God, one of those pieces of armor is called the loin guard of truth. Now we're talking spiritually, okay? The truth is something that protects you from the devil, along with the other pieces of armor, and those who serve the devil. So when people begin to think of magic as nothing more than make-believe or something in a movie or a story, they become much more desensitized and accepting whenever they see books about actual witchcraft and such things. When I was a kid, whenever we would get together and we were like hanging out, the parents would be out somewhere, me and my cousins or me and my friends would be hanging out. Other kids would dare you to go into the bathroom, turn off all the lights, and try to summon some evil being by saying their name 3 times in a mirror. Other times the kids would play with a Ouija board, or they would try and have a seance. And everybody's like, oh, these things are all fake, it's nonsense. But these things sound harmless, but the fact is they are ways to expose ourselves and desensitize, if nothing else, ourselves to the spirit world, to open ourselves to be willing to receive such things. Drug use is another gateway to open yourself to the spirit world. And I know that may sound far-fetched, I know that may sound crazy, but the fact is when you really talk to a drug user, and when you talk to anyone who's involved deeply in these things, you're going to find that they feel that something takes control of them and they no longer have control over their bodies. They become enslaved either to their addiction or to this power that guides them. If you no longer have strength to control your own mind and your own body, that means you are possessed with something, and it's not the Spirit of God. Because where the Spirit of God is, that's where freedom is. We are freed by the gospel of Christ, because He gives us the truth, and the truth shall make us free. So, I personally don't think you have to prohibit anything with the mention of magic, but you need to teach your children to separate truth from fantasy, and never allow them to be desensitized to the truth. And I think right there are bookshelves, with fantasy novels that talk about all these different magic and fun things that we think of as just make-believe. I've seen the Harry Potter movies. But when I bring my 8-year-old in, and she's watched some of the Harry Potter movies as well, with her cousins and here at the house, she knows where real magic comes from. And she knows that this is fantasy, but the truth of magic is it's evil, and it's not something we should ever practice. And she knows that it comes from Satan and his fallen angels. And just to kind of even give one more example of where I see this opening doorways for those who are not teaching their children to separate truth from fantasy, when I went to Books A Million, I think it was, and they had a Harry Potter weekend, and they were having all the different Harry Potter books and action figures and all these things for sale. And they were just, they decorated the whole store in the different Hogwarts colors. Interestingly, right on the end caps, right around the Harry Potter displays, where all the kids would be looking, on the end caps facing them, so here was the display, here was the end cap, there were books on witchcraft, books on summoning, books on potion, and these weren't fictional books. These were actually books based on that belief system. It is everywhere, and it opens you up. You start being interested in the fun of Harry Potter, but if you aren't educated to know that real magic is evil, then you may find yourself, or dealing with your family, falling into the trap of looking after magic, which is a very real thing, and that's why it's forbidden. And then this section of verses ends up with a slightly separate topic, okay? And this is where, for a child, that would curse their father or their mother. So, now when we're talking about a child, we're not talking about a little kid, we're talking about an adult child. So, if you were to curse or wish harm or wish death or evil of any type on someone who loved you, who gave you life, who provided for you, that meant you were worthy of death. The term curse also means to be sorely disrespectful, extremely disrespectful. These people, we'll find out later, were stoned as the punishment for this capital crime. It may seem extreme, but it's really interesting to me. When you go through the Ten Commandments, you see the first four commandments have everything to do with honoring God. And that's why they're the first four. And then you see the last six. So I see them listed as in order of importance. And it's interesting, the ones after honoring God, the very next thing, the fifth commandment, is honoring your parents. And it's listed before murder. It's listed before adultery, both of which were also capital crimes, which means you would be killed if you committed them. We'll be talking about adultery and extramarital affairs in the next couple posts. But anyone who cannot honor their parents, even when they're displeased with them, they will have a very difficult time honoring God. And if you were to turn and curse your parents, I mean, again, I'm not saying that you say a curse word, although that may apply. But if you were to curse them, to wish harm and evil upon them, you were worthy of death. So the fact is, God gave us our parents, good parents, bad parents. I realize there's both sets. But even those who are your enemies, the Bible is clear that we are to pray for them and wish good for them and pray that God would forgive them and change their hearts. And if you can't do that for your parents, how could you do it for your enemy? And if you can't love your parents because they maybe don't treat you right, how can you love God that you don't see? So anyways, that's going to wrap up this post. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or any comments, I know these are some controversial topics and maybe not popular what I'm saying, but by all means, throw some comments below. I'd be happy to see them. Otherwise, God bless you. Thanks for joining us on Learn the Bible.